The wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal as Max, the German shepherd, stood rigid against the pelting snow. His thick fur, normally sleek and shining, was matted with ice crystals that caught the dim porch light in eerie glints. The temperature had plummeted to 15 below zero, yet there he remained, a silent sentinel outside his empty kennel. Jack Peterson watched from the kitchen window, his breath fogging the glass, his weathered hands clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. 3 nights now. 3 nights of this inexplicable behavior from the dog who'd never once disobeyed him in 7 years. "What are you guarding out there, old friend?" Jack whispered, his voice raspy with concern. Setting his mug down with a decisive thud, Jack pulled on his heavy boots and coat. He'd waited long enough. Whatever was happening had to end tonight before Max froze to death from this strange, self-imposed exile. The moment Jack's boots crunched across the snow-covered yard, Max's ears pricked up and his posture changed. Jack faltered mid-step as a low, threatening growl emanated from his beloved companion. In the harsh beam of the flashlight, Max's eyes reflected back, not with their usual warmth and loyalty, but with a primal warning that stopped Jack cold. "Do not come closer." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Jack Peterson hadn't always been a solitary man in a cabin on the outskirts of Pinewood, Montana. Before the isolation, before the nightmares that still jolted him awake most nights, he'd been Dr. Jack Peterson, one of the most respected veterinarians in his unit, stationed in Afghanistan. His hands, now calloused from chopping wood and building fences, had once performed delicate surgeries on military working dogs under the most harrowing conditions. That was until the day the field hospital had been hit. Jack still smelled the smoke sometimes, still heard the screams, both human and canine, as he'd worked desperately to save what lives he could. After losing 3 handlers and their dogs in one blood-soaked afternoon, something inside Jack had broken. He'd returned home with a purple heart, a medical discharge, and a profound distrust in his ability to ever heal anything again. Max had come into his life not by choice, but by necessity. The German Shepherd had been one of the military's finest, a tracker and patrol dog with an impeccable record, until an insurgent attack left him with a permanent limp in his right hind leg. Jack had been there that day too, had watched in awe as Max had dragged his wounded handler to safety before returning to alert the unit of the hidden danger, taking a bullet in the process. That display of unflinching loyalty had saved 15 American lives, including Jack's. When Max was deemed unfit for continued service due to his injuries, Jack had quietly arranged to adopt him. If 2 broken souls couldn't heal in the conventional world, perhaps they could find some peace together in the wilderness. For 5 years, they'd lived in their self-imposed exile on the 40 acres Jack had purchased with his military pension. The nearest neighbor, Tom Thompson, lived a mile down the dirt road, and the small town of Pinewood was a 20-minute drive away. This isolation suited both man and dog perfectly. Their daily routine of long walks through the surrounding forest, quiet evenings by the fireplace, and the honest work of maintaining their small homestead had gradually begun to mend what war had shattered in both of them. They weren't whole, perhaps they never would be, but together they were enough. Last summer had been particularly difficult for Jack. The anniversary of the attack always brought back the nightmares in full force, leaving him restless and irritable. His therapist from the VA, whom he spoke with over the phone once a month, had suggested he find a project to focus his energy on. "Something constructive," she'd said. "Something that gives you a sense of purpose." Jack had pondered her words while watching Max stretch out on the porch, seeking relief from the Montana summer heat. The idea had come to him then. He would build Max the finest dog kennel in the county. Not that Max needed one. He'd always slept inside the cabin at the foot of Jack's bed. But having a comfortable outdoor retreat might be nice for both of them. Jack had sketched out the plans that very afternoon. It would be more than a simple doghouse. It would be a testament to their bond. For 6 weeks, Jack worked on the kennel with meticulous attention to detail. He selected cedar planks for their durability and natural resistance to insects, carefully measured and remeasured each cut, and even installed a small covered porch where Max could lie in the shade. Inside, he built a raised platform lined with a custom-fitted orthopedic bed to ease the pressure on Max's injured leg. The roof was designed with proper ventilation and insulation to maintain a comfortable temperature in both summer heat and winter cold. Jack even added small windows with actual glass panes, ensuring Max would have natural light without drafts. "What do you think, boy?" Jack had asked when he finally set down his tools, surveying the finished product with a sense of satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. Max had patted over, sniffed the structure thoroughly, then looked up at Jack with what seemed like approval in his intelligent eyes. That night, as a test, Max had willingly slept in his new quarters, while Jack sat on the porch with a rare beer, watching the stars and feeling, for the first time in a long while, a small sense of peace. As autumn painted the surrounding forest in fiery hues of orange and red, Max used the kennel frequently, especially during the warm afternoons when he could lie on the small porch and survey his domain. Jack often found himself sitting beside the dog, sharing comfortable silence as they watched golden leaves drift to the ground. These were good days, days when the past seemed a little less oppressive. The first snow had come early that year, dusting the landscape with white in the first week of December. Jack had added extra blankets to Max's bed in the kennel, though he expected the dog would prefer to sleep inside the cabin as temperatures dropped. For the first few days, everything continued as normal. Max would occasionally use the kennel during the day, but always came inside when evening fell. Then, on December 10th, the pattern changed. Jack had called Max in for the night, but the dog had hesitated at the door, looking back toward the kennel with an unusual intensity. After some coaxing, Max had reluctantly come inside, but his behavior remained odd, pacing by the door, whining softly, clearly disturbed by something Jack couldn't perceive. The next night was worse. Max had flatly refused to come inside, positioning himself in front of the kennel like a guard. Jack had finally given up and left the cabin door ajar so Max could come in if he changed his mind. But when Jack awoke the next morning and looked out the window, he was shocked to see Max in exactly the same position, a light dusting of snow covering his fur. The dog hadn't moved all night. By the third night, Jack's concern had turned to genuine worry. The temperatures were dropping rapidly as a cold front moved in, and the weather service was predicting record lows. Yet despite the biting cold and increasing snowfall, Max continued his vigilant post beside the kennel, refusing to enter it or return to the warm cabin. "What's gotten into you?" Jack asked as he trudged through the deepening snow, carrying Max's food bowl. The dog accepted the food but remained strangely alert, his eyes constantly darting to the kennel's entrance. Most disturbing of all, Jack noticed that Max never actually entered the kennel he'd so lovingly constructed. Instead, the dog slept in the snow beside it, as though guarding something inside. By the fourth morning, Jack's patience had thinned along with his composure. The loyalty between man and dog ran deep, but this inexplicable behavior was endangering Max's health. Whatever was happening had to stop, and Jack was determined to get to the bottom of it. "This ends now," Jack muttered, zipping his heavy coat up to his chin as the wind cut through the yard like a knife. The morning sun offered little warmth, a pale disk hanging in a colorless sky. Max stood at attention beside the kennel, his posture stiffening as Jack approached. 20 feet away, 15, 10, Jack had never seen the transformation that came over his dog. Max's ears flattened against his skull, his lips curled back to reveal gleaming teeth, and a low, threatening growl rumbled from deep in his chest. "Max?" Jack stopped in his tracks, disbelief washing over him. In all their years together, through firefights and thunderstorms, through Jack's worst nights thrashed and screamed in the grip of his nightmares, Max had never once shown aggression toward him. The German Shepherd had been his constant, his one unwavering source of trust in a world that had taught him trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Max, it's me," Jack said softly, using the gentle tone that had always calmed the dog. He took another tentative step forward. The growl deepened, and Max's body lowered into a defensive stance. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the biting wind. This wasn't just unusual behavior. This was Max actively warning him away, protecting whatever was in that kennel with a fierceness typically reserved for threats to Jack himself. Retreating slowly, Jack made his way back to the cabin porch, never turning his back on the dog. Inside, he paced the worn floorboards, occasionally glancing out the window where Max maintained his vigil. The rational part of Jack's mind, the part that had survived tours of duty and the horrors of war, methodically assessed the situation. Something was in that kennel, something Max deemed worthy of protection, even from Jack. The question was, what? Wildlife wasn't uncommon in these parts. Could a wounded animal have sought shelter there? But Max had been trained to alert, not adopt. Perhaps it was something more sinister. Jack's thoughts darkened. The neighboring county had reported problems with drug trafficking through the national forest. Could someone be using his property, his kennel, to store something illegal? But that made no sense either. Max would have alerted to strangers on the property, not protected their contraband. As the day wore on, Jack's concern for Max's health began to outweigh his confusion. The temperature was dropping by the hour, and the local news was reporting an Arctic front moving in. Tonight would bring dangerous cold, and no matter how thick Max's coat was, no dog should be out in such conditions. "I can't let you freeze to death out there, buddy," Jack said to himself, watching as Max shook off a fresh coating of snow but maintained his position. "Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together." Jack stood at the window, his forehead pressed against the cold glass, weighing his options. He could try to force Max inside, but the dog's behavior had made it clear that wouldn't be easy or safe for either of them. He could call animal control, but the idea of strangers handling Max, a dog with military training and trauma, made his blood run cold. No, this was between him and Max. He needed a different approach. The answer came to him as he was making his lunch, a simple sandwich with the last of the roast beef he'd picked up in town 3 days ago. Max loved roast beef. It was the one treat the disciplined dog would break protocol for, the one indulgence Jack allowed him. Perhaps. Jack's plan formed quickly. He would use the roast beef to lure Max into the cabin, then secure him inside while Jack investigated the kennel. It felt like a betrayal of their bond, a manipulation of the trust they'd built over years, but Jack couldn't see another option. Max's safety had to come first. With methodical precision, the same calm, measured movements he'd used in field surgeries under fire, Jack prepared a bowl with small pieces of roast beef. He opened the cabin door and stood in the doorway, not stepping out onto the porch. Max's head snapped up immediately, his attention split between Jack and the kennel. "Max, come," Jack called, his voice firm but gentle. He shook the bowl slightly, letting the scent carry on the wind. "Come on, boy." Max didn't move, but his ears perked forward. The internal conflict was visible. The training that commanded him to obey Jack, warring with whatever new imperative held him by the kennel. Jack waited patiently, not pushing, not advancing. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Max took a single hesitant step toward the cabin. "That's it," Jack encouraged. "Come on, Max. Good boy." Incrementally, Max made his way toward the cabin, stopping frequently to look back at the kennel. Each time he did, Jack's heart sank a little. Whatever was happening, it was tearing Max apart to leave his post. When the dog finally reached the porch steps, Jack set the bowl down just inside the doorway, requiring Max to fully enter the cabin to reach it. The moment Max crossed the threshold, Jack felt both relief and a renewed sense of guilt. The dog looked up at him with such trust as he approached the bowl, completely unaware of Jack's intention to confine him. As Max began to eat, Jack quietly moved to close the door behind them. The sound of the latch clicking shut made Max's head jerk up. Instantly, he abandoned the food and lunged for the door, his claws scrabbling against the wood. The betrayal in his eyes when he looked back at Jack was almost unbearable. "I'm sorry, boy," Jack said, his voice thick. "I have to know what's out there." Max's whine escalated to frantic barking as Jack moved to the window. The dog jumped up, paws against the glass, trying to see the kennel. Jack had never seen Max so distressed, not even during the worst of the thunderstorms that sometimes triggered his wartime memories. "I'll be right back," Jack promised, pulling on his heavy gloves. Whatever it is, we'll handle it. As Jack stepped back out into the biting cold, Max's barking reached a fever pitch behind him. The sound tore at Jack's heart, but he set his jaw and moved purposefully toward the kennel. Whatever secret it held, he was about to discover it. The heaviness of betrayal settled in Jack's chest as Max's desperate barks echoed through the cabin walls. Never in their years together had he tricked the dog this way. Their relationship had been built on absolute trust. The kind that develops when you've seen the worst the world has to offer and chosen to face it side by side. Now, as Jack trudged through ankle-deep snow toward the kennel, each of Max's frantic barks felt like an accusation. "It's for your own good," Jack muttered, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. The rational part of his mind knew this was necessary. Max had been standing guard in freezing temperatures for days, refusing food and proper shelter. As his caretaker, Jack had a responsibility to intervene. Still, the look in Max's eyes when the door closed between them haunted Jack with each step. The deception had been painfully simple. Max's discipline was ingrained from his military training, but roast beef had always been his weakness. Jack had prepared the meat carefully, cutting it into small pieces and warming it slightly to enhance the aroma. Even then, Max had hesitated, torn between his duty to whatever he was guarding and the command from his human. The internal struggle had been visible in every line of the dog's body, the slight forward motion followed by a backwards glance, the whine that escaped him as he finally, reluctantly, crossed the threshold into the cabin. Jack had moved quickly then, sliding the door shut behind Max while the dog was momentarily distracted by the food. The sound of the latch clicking into place had triggered an immediate reaction. Max abandoning the bowl and hurling himself against the door, claws scratching desperately at the wood. When that failed, he'd race to the window, pressing his nose against the glass, tracking Jack's movement with eyes that conveyed a mixture of panic and betrayal. Now as Jack approached the kennel, guilt competed with determination. The wind had picked up, driving needles of ice against his exposed face. He pulled his scarf higher and pressed forward. Whatever was in that kennel, he would deal with it, and then make things right with Max. 20 feet from the kennel, Jack paused. From this angle, nothing seemed amiss. The structure stood just as he had built it, snow gathering on its cedar-shingled roof. Taking a deep breath, he continued forward, noting the tracks in the snow where Max had worn a path from his vigilant pacing. 15 feet, 10 feet, 5. Jack was close enough now to see that the small door was partially ajar, not fully closed as it should have been. Back at the cabin, Max's barking had reached a frenzied pitch. Jack could hear the dog hurling himself against the door repeatedly, a dull thud followed by renewed barking. The noise was so distressing that Jack nearly turned back, almost convinced himself that whatever mystery the kennel held wasn't worth this breach of trust. But he'd come too far to turn back now. 3 feet from the entrance, Jack knelt in the snow. The wind momentarily died down, and in that brief silence, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A soft, chittering sound coming from inside the kennel. It wasn't a sound he recognized, neither canine nor human. Steeling himself, Jack reached for the small flashlight in his pocket. Jack pushed the door of the kennel open wider with cautious movements. The interior was dark despite the small windows he'd installed, shadows gathering in the corners. He clicked on the flashlight, sweeping its beam slowly across the space. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The orthopedic bed he'd custom-fitted for Max, the water bowl, the insulated walls. Then the beam caught a movement in the farthest corner. 2 eyes reflected the light back at him, glowing eerily in the darkness. Not Max's familiar brown eyes, but smaller ones, ringed with black fur. As Jack adjusted the beam, the creature came into focus, a raccoon, female by the size of her, huddled protectively around something Jack couldn't quite make out. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack whispered, shifting to get a better view. The raccoon didn't flee as he'd expected, but instead curled more tightly around her charges. And then Jack saw them. Tiny forms nestled against her, at least 6 of them. Baby raccoons, eyes not yet open, their small bodies vibrating with cold despite their mother's protection. Jack's immediate impulse was irritation. All this drama, this standoff with Max, because a raccoon had decided to use the expensive kennel he'd built as a nursery? But as he observed the mother's protective stance, another thought dawned on him. It wasn't just that a raccoon had moved in. Max was deliberately protecting them. Back at the cabin, the barking had intensified. Jack could hear glass rattling as Max threw himself against the window. The dog wasn't just upset about being tricked. He was desperate to return to his self-appointed duty as guardian. Jack's irritation softened as he studied the raccoon family more closely. The mother looked exhausted, her fur matted and thin in places. And there was something else. Her left front paw was badly swollen, bearing the unmistakable marks of a trap. She'd been injured, had somehow escaped, and in her desperation had found shelter in the one place that seemed safe. A kennel that smelled of a dog but had been unoccupied during the days. "You poor thing," Jack murmured, his veterinary instincts surfacing despite years of disuse. The wound was infected, the flesh angry and red around the metal's indentation. Without treatment, the raccoon would likely lose the paw, if not her life. And if she died, her babies wouldn't survive either. A sharp crashing sound from the direction of the cabin snapped Jack's attention away from the raccoon family. The barking had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Years of military training sent adrenaline coursing through Jack's system. Something was wrong. Carefully closing the kennel door to protect the raccoons from the cold, Jack turned toward the cabin just in time to see Max barreling through what had once been the kitchen window. The dog had somehow broken through the glass and was now racing across the yard, a streak of dark fur against the white snow, heading straight for Jack in the kennel. "Max, down," Jack commanded, using the firm voice that had always halted the dog in his tracks. But Max was beyond commands now, driven by something more primal than training. He skidded to a stop in front of Jack, not aggressively but protectively, positioning himself between his human and the kennel. Jack stared in astonishment as Max turned to face him, not with the aggression he'd shown earlier, but with a pleading whine, as if begging Jack to understand. Then, remarkably, the dog backed up to the kennel entrance, sat down firmly, and fixed Jack with a steady gaze. "You want me to help them," Jack said slowly, the realization dawning. "That's what this has been about." Max's ears perked forward at Jack's tone, his tail sweeping once across the snow. It was confirmation enough. Jack's mind raced as he pieced together what must have happened. Max had discovered the injured raccoon and her babies, perhaps drawn by the sounds of distress. Instead of following his predatory instincts or chasing them away, he had chosen to protect them. The dog had appointed himself guardian to these vulnerable creatures, sacrificing his comfort to stand watch in the freezing cold. "You crazy noble fool," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "You could have just told me." Max whined again in Jack's hand with his nose before turning back to the kennel. The message couldn't have been clearer if the dog had spoken aloud. They need help. Now. Jack knelt in the snow beside Max, rubbing the dog's ears in silent apology and gratitude. "Let's see what we can do for your friends," he said softly. As a trained veterinarian, Jack's assessment was quick and grim. The mother raccoon's injury was severe, the result of a spring-loaded trap, illegal in this part of Montana. The infection had spread up her leg, causing fever and weakness that threatened her ability to care for her young. The babies, barely a week old by Jack's estimation, were undernourished and cold, despite the bedding Max had apparently dragged into the kennel for them. "We need to get them inside," Jack decided, looking at Max. "All of them. But I need your help, buddy. She trusts you. I'm just another human to her, and humans are what hurt her in the first place." Understanding seemed to flash in Max's intelligent eyes. The dog rose and slowly entered the kennel, approaching Raccoon with a gentleness that belied his size and training. Jack watched in amazement as Max lay down beside the frightened mother, his body creating a warm barrier between her and the kennel entrance, where Jack knelt. Slowly, with the patience he'd once used to approach wounded animals in the field, Jack extended his hand into the kennel. The raccoon bristled, showing her teeth, but Max gently nudged her with his nose. A silent communication passed between the species, and to Jack's astonishment, the raccoon's defensive posture relaxed slightly. "That's it," Jack encouraged, keeping his voice low and soothing. "We're going to help you. You and your babies." It took nearly an hour of coaxing, with Max serving as mediator, before the raccoon would allow Jack to slide a shallow box into the kennel. With painstaking care, he helped the mother and her babies into the makeshift carrier, using a soft blanket to keep them warm. Throughout the process, Max remained a calming presence, somehow communicating to the frightened animal that Jack could be trusted. The journey back to the cabin was slow and careful, with Jack carrying the precious cargo and Max trotting anxiously alongside, constantly checking on his unlikely charges. The broken window let in a blast of frigid air as they entered, reminding Jack of the damage Max had done in his desperation to protect the raccoons. "Guess we both destroyed some things today," Jack murmured, glancing at the dog. "Trust. Property, but we'll rebuild. That's what we do, right?" Max pressed against Jack's leg in response, his eyes never leaving the box containing the raccoon family. Jack worked quickly to create a warm, secure space for the injured mother and her babies in the mudroom off the kitchen. It wasn't ideal. The room was small and mainly used for storing boots and outdoor gear, but it could be closed off from the rest of the cabin and had a separate exit to the outside. Using old towels and blankets, Jack fashioned a nest in a large plastic storage container, adding a heating pad set on low beneath the blankets to provide gentle warmth. Once the raccoons were settled in their temporary home, Jack turned his attention to the mother's injury. His veterinary kit, unused for years but still stocked with essentials, provided what he needed to clean and treat the wound. Max remained a constant presence, lying beside the container and occasionally making soft sounds of reassurance when the raccoon grew agitated with Jack's treatment. "You know," Jack said to Max as he worked, "in all my years treating animals, I've never seen anything quite like this. You and her, it defies everything I know about natural behaviors." Max thumped his tail against the floor, eyes never leaving the raccoon. "Makes me wonder what happened out there in the woods," Jack continued, carefully wrapping the raccoon's treated paw in a light bandage. "Did you find her in that trap? Is that what this is about?" The memory surfaced suddenly, a day in late October when Max had disappeared during their afternoon walk. Jack had searched for nearly 2 hours before the dog returned, his muzzle wet and his manner unusually subdued. Jack had checked him for injuries, finding none, and had eventually attributed the strange behavior to Max, perhaps tracking a deer or other wildlife. Now, watching Max's careful attention to the raccoon mother, Jack wondered if that day had marked the beginning of this unlikely alliance. Had Max found her trapped, somehow freed her, and then tracked her to ensure her safety? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was before his eyes. A trained military dog abandoning years of conditioning to protect a wild animal and her young. As darkness fell, Jack moved around the cabin, boarding up the broken window as best he could until proper repairs could be made. The wind had intensified, bringing with it the heavy snow the weather service had predicted. The temperature gauge outside the kitchen window read 15 below zero and falling. Jack shuddered to think what might have happened to Max if this standoff had continued into the night, let alone to the vulnerable raccoon family. When the essential tasks were complete, Jack settled into his armchair by the fire, physically and emotionally exhausted. Max lay at his feet, finally relaxed now that his charges were safe and warm in the adjacent room. Jack reached down to stroke the dog's head, marveling at the depth of compassion this animal had shown. "You did good, buddy," he said softly. "Real good. Though next time, maybe try barking twice for injured raccoon and 3 times for call the vet. Might save us both some trouble." Max sighed contentedly, his eyes drifting closed for what was probably the first real rest he'd had in days. Outside, the storm gathered strength, snow blanketing the landscape and burying the tracks that led from cabin to kennel. As Jack watched the white swirl beyond his window, he reflected on how a wounded raccoon and a stubborn dog had somehow awakened something he thought long dead. The healer's instinct, the desire to mend what was broken. What Jack didn't know as he finally drifted off to sleep in his chair with Max snoring gently at his feet was that the storm now engulfing them would be just the beginning of their challenges. The raccoon family was safe for tonight, but morning would bring new complications, and not all of them would come from the natural world. Jack awoke to the sound of tires crunching through snow. Disoriented, he glanced at the clock, just past 7 in the morning. Max was already at the window, his posture alert but not alarmed. Familiar visitor, then? Jack groaned as he stood, his body stiff from spending the night in the armchair. A quick check on the raccoons revealed the mother awake and watchful, her babies nursing. The antibiotics he'd administered seemed to be helping. The swelling in her paw had decreased slightly. "Morning, Jack. Hell of a storm we had." The booming voice belonged to Tom Thompson, Jack's closest neighbor, standing on the porch with a thermos in one hand. Tom was a barrel-chested man in his 60s, with a perpetually ruddy face and a white beard that he claimed made him look distinguished, but actually made him resemble an off-season Santa Claus. He frowned as Jack opened the door. "What happened to your window?" "Max had a disagreement with it," Jack said, stepping aside to let Tom in. The two men weren't friends exactly. Jack didn't have friends anymore, but they had an understanding. Tom checked on Jack during bad weather, and Jack pretended not to mind. "That doesn't sound like Max," Tom said, eyeing the German Shepherd who had positioned himself in the hallway leading to the mudroom. "That dog's disciplined as they come." "He had his reasons," Jack replied, accepting the thermos. "Coffee? Fresh brewed. Figured you might need it." Tom stopped snow from his boots. "You hear about the poachers they caught over in Whitefish last week? Game warden found a whole operation. Illegal traps, deer carcasses, even some bear parts headed for the black market." Jack's hand stilled on the thermos cap. "No, hadn't heard. Nasty business. They got 2 of them, but word is there were at least 4 involved." Tom shrugged out of his heavy coat. "Mind if I warm up a bit before heading back? Sarah sent some of her sourdough if you're interested." Jack nodded, his mind racing. Traps, like the one that had injured the raccoon mother. As Tom settled at the kitchen table, Jack poured coffee and tried to appear casual. "They say where these poachers were operating? All through the national forest, apparently. Could be right in our backyard for all we know." Tom accepted the mug Jack offered. "That's partially why I came by. Wanted to make sure you were keeping an eye out. Sarah's worried they might mistake Max for a wolf if he's running loose on your property." As if on cue, Max let out a low whine from his position guarding the mudroom. Tom's eyebrows rose. "What's he fixated on in there? You got mice again?" Before Jack could answer, a distinctive chittering sound came from the mudroom. Tom froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Was that?" "It's not what you think," Jack started, but Tom was already pushing back from the table. "Raccoons? You've got raccoons in your house?" Tom's face darkened. "Damn varmints are nothing but trouble, Jack. They carry diseases, tear up everything." "She's injured," Jack interrupted, stepping between Tom and the hallway where Max was now standing at full alert. "Caught in an illegal trap. I'm treating her." Tom stared at him. "You're doctoring a wild raccoon? Have you lost your mind? Those things are pests, Jack. Vermin. Why not just put it out of its misery?" "She has babies," Jack said quietly. "6 of them. They wouldn't survive without her." "All the more reason," Tom exclaimed. "You want 7 raccoons tearing up your property come spring? They'll get into everything, kill your chickens if you get any." "I'm not killing a mother trying to protect her young," Jack said, his voice taking on the steely quality that had once commanded respect in combat zones. "Not happening, Tom." The older man studied Jack for a long moment, then shook his head. "Always figured the war left you a little touched in the head, but this takes the cake." He stood, reaching for his coat. "I'm calling animal control. They'll handle it properly." Max growled, the sound starting low in his chest and building. Jack hadn't heard that particular tone since Afghanistan, when the dog had detected a threat none of the humans had perceived. Tom paused, eyeing the German Shepherd warily. "I wouldn't," Jack said mildly, though there was nothing mild about the set of his shoulders or the look in his eyes. "Max is protective of them. Might not end well." "Are you threatening me, Peterson?" "Just stating facts. Max considers those raccoons under his protection. He broke through a window to get to them when I tried to separate them." Jack held Tom's gaze. "Now imagine what he might do if strangers came trying to take them away." Tom's face flushed deeper red. "This isn't over," he snapped, shoving his arms into his coat sleeves. "Those animals are a public health hazard. People in town have a right to know there's a veteran up here harboring disease-carrying vermin." Do what you need to do, Jack replied, opening the door. And I'll do the same. After Tom's truck had disappeared down the snow-covered drive, Jack leaned against the door and exhaled slowly. Max came to press against his leg, looking up with concerned eyes. Yeah, that could have gone better, Jack admitted, scratching behind the dog's ears. But you and I have faced worse odds, haven't we, boy? The day passed in a tense quiet as Jack tended to the raccoon mother, carefully cleaning her wound and administering another dose of antibiotics. Her improvement was remarkable. The infection was responding to treatment, and she seemed more alert, watching Jack with intelligent wariness, but no longer trying to swipe at him when he approached. The babies, too, looked stronger, their tiny bodies wriggling with more vigor as they nursed. By late afternoon, Jack had formulated a plan. The raccoon family couldn't stay in his mudroom indefinitely, but they weren't ready to face the winter wilderness either, especially with the mother still healing. They needed a transitional space, something safe from predators and the elements, but where the mother could begin teaching her young the survival skills they would need. Inspiration struck as Jack gazed out at his half-collapsed garden shed. With some work, it could be converted into a perfect raccoon sanctuary, secure, protected from the elements, but separate from his living space. He was sketching renovation plans when his satellite phone rang. Jack, it's Sarah Thompson. Tom's wife's voice was hushed, nearly drowned out by background noise that sounded like multiple conversations. I'm at Donovan's place in town. I thought you should know. Tom's been running his mouth about your raccoons. There's a whole group planning to drive up there tomorrow. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of group? The kind that thinks wild animals have no place near civilization. Frank Miller's leading the charge. You know he lost all his chickens to a fox last winter. They're talking about bringing traps, Jack. And guns. I appreciate the warning, Sarah. There's more, she said, her voice dropping further. You remember the Peterson place over on the East Ridge? The one that's been empty since old Jim died? What about it? There's been activity there. Trucks coming and going at odd hours. Tom's been acting strange about it, gets defensive whenever I mention it. There was a pause. Jack, I think that trap your raccoon got caught in might not be from some random poacher. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The trap. Tom's overreaction. His insistence on involving others rather than letting Jack handle the situation privately. You think Tom's involved with the poachers, Jack said flatly. I don't know for certain, Sarah admitted. But when the game warden was around asking questions last month, Tom was nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, and now he's whipping everyone into a frenzy about your raccoons? Seems like a convenient distraction. Or he's worried the mother raccoon came from a trap he set, Jack concluded. And if I report it? Exactly. Listen, I have to go before he gets suspicious. Just be careful, Jack. The line went dead, leaving Jack staring at the phone. Max whined softly, picking up on the tension radiating from his human. Outside, the wind had picked up again, signaling another approaching storm. The weather forecast had warned of a severe system moving in, potentially the worst December storm in decades. Looks like we're in for a fight on multiple fronts, boy, Jack told Max, moving to check the supplies he'd gathered. If Sarah was right, tomorrow would bring armed men to his property, men determined to destroy the creatures Max had risked everything to protect. And if the coming storm was as bad as predicted, they might all be trapped here together. As night fell, Jack made preparations. He secured the raccoon family in the bathroom, the most interior room of the cabin, safe from both the storm and potential intruders. He stacked firewood by the hearth, filled containers with water in case the pipes froze, and checked that his generator had enough fuel. These were all routine precautions for a Montana winter storm, nothing that would raise eyebrows if anyone came calling. What wasn't routine was the military-grade medical kit he placed within easy reach, or the way he positioned his grandfather's old hunting rifle near the door. Not loaded. Jack hadn't touched a loaded weapon since leaving the service. But available. A visible reminder that this property and its occupants, human and animal alike, were under protection. Max seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The dog had always been attuned to Jack's moods, able to sense the difference between ordinary tension and the coiled alertness that preceded true danger. Now he moved through the cabin, with the focused purpose Jack recognized from their deployment days, checking entry points, pausing to listen at windows, returning periodically to ensure the raccoon family remained safe. By midnight, the storm was upon them in full force. Wind screamed around the cabin's corners, finding every gap and crack. Snow fell so heavily that the world beyond the windows disappeared into a white void. Jack had just finished stoking the fire when Max suddenly stiffened, ears perked toward the door. "What is it, boy?" Jack moved to the window, peering into the maelstrom. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow. Then a faint glow appeared in the distance, headlights, barely visible through the storm, making their slow way up his drive. "Damn fools," Jack muttered. "Who'd be out in this?" But he knew. Tom had worked himself and others into a righteous fury, one that even a blizzard wouldn't deter. The armed group Sarah had warned about was coming now, using the storm as cover. Jack's mind raced through options. His isolated location, once a comfort, now seemed a liability. There would be no calling for help. The satellite phone worked sporadically in good weather, never in storms like this. If Tom and his group had turned to violence, Jack and Max would face them alone. The headlights grew closer, finally illuminating 2 trucks forcing their way through the deepening snow. Jack counted 6 men as they disembarked, all bundled against the cold, several carrying rifles. Tom led them, gesturing toward the cabin with angry movements visible even through the curtain of snow. "Max, guard," Jack commanded softly, and the dog moved to position himself before the hallway leading to the bathroom where the raccoons were secured. Then Jack opened the door, stepping onto the porch to meet the approaching group. "Kind of late for a social call," he called over the howl of the wind, "especially in weather like this." Tom reached the bottom of the porch steps, his face barely visible between his hat and scarf. Behind him, the other men spread out in a loose semicircle. Jack recognized a few. Frank Miller, the Donovan brothers, old Percy Williams, neighbors, not friends. "We know what you're hiding, Peterson," Tom shouted. "Sarah called and warned you, didn't she? Woman never could keep her mouth shut." "Go home, Tom," Jack replied evenly. "Whatever you think you're doing here, it's not worth it. Not in this storm." "Told the boys about your raccoon sanctuary," Tom continued as if Jack hadn't spoken. "Told them how you threatened me when I said I'd call animal control. They agree it's not right, wild animals being given priority over good people's safety." Frank Miller stepped forward, rifle cradled in his arms. "My grandkids play in those woods, Peterson. If those raccoons are rabid—" "They're not rabid," Jack interrupted. "The mother was injured in a trap, illegal trap," he added, watching Tom's face carefully. "The kind poachers use." A moment of silence fell, broken only by the wind. Jack saw the quick glance exchanged between Tom and Percy, the slight shuffling of feet. "That's quite an accusation," Tom finally said. "But we're not here about trapping. We're here about dangerous wildlife being harbored where it doesn't belong." "Like those bear parts you've been selling out of the old Peterson place?" Jack asked quietly. Tom's eyes widened briefly before narrowing to slits. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I think the game warden would disagree," Jack said. "I think they'd be very interested in the operation you've been running, especially after they caught your associates in Whitefish last week." The tension in the group shifted palpably. The Donovan brothers exchanged glances, and Frank Miller took a step back, confusion evident even through the swirling snow. "He's lying," Tom said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice, trying to distract us from the real issue. "Am I?" Jack crossed his arms. "I made a call before the storm hit full force, reported an injured raccoon caught in an illegal trap on my property. Described the trap in detail. Game warden seemed very interested, said it matched the ones they found in Whitefish, asked me to preserve it for evidence." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Jack watched as doubt spread through the group, men shifting uncomfortable glances between him and Tom. "I don't know anything about any poaching," Frank Miller said slowly. "I'm just here about the raccoons, Tom. You said this was about public safety." "It is," Tom insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Peterson's lost his mind living up here alone, treating wild animals like pets. It ain't right." "Neither is illegal trapping," one of the Donovan brothers muttered, "or lying to get us out here in this storm." The group's unity was fracturing before Jack's eyes. He pressed his advantage. The storm's getting worse. You all need to get home before the roads are completely impassable. Whatever Tom's told you about me or the raccoons, we can discuss it when the weather clears. Preferably with the game warden present. The mention of the game warden was the final push needed. Frank Miller lowered his rifle. I'm heading back. Coming, Donovans? The brothers nodded, already turning toward their truck. Percy hesitated, looking to Tom, who stood rigid with fury at the bottom of the steps. This isn't over, Peterson, Tom spat. Actually, I think it is, Jack replied calmly. Unless you want me sharing what Sarah told me about the activity at the old Peterson place. I'm sure your friends here would be fascinated to know what you've really been up to. Tom's face contorted with rage, but he was outmaneuvered and knew it. With a final venomous glare, he turned and stomped back to his truck, Percy trailing uncertainly behind him. Jack watched until the taillights disappeared into the swirling white, then retreated into the warmth of the cabin. Max met him at the door, alert and ready. The dog's steadfast loyalty in the face of danger, whether from armed men or winter storms, was a comfort Jack had come to rely on. Good job, buddy, Jack said, rubbing the dog's ears. We held them off for now. But as he moved to check on the raccoon family, a new sound caught Jack's attention, a dull roar that grew steadily louder, rising above even the howl of the wind. Jack's blood ran cold as he recognized it. Avalanche. The steep slope behind his property, loaded with fresh, heavy snow, was giving way. The roar became deafening as Jack lunged for the bathroom door, shouting for Max to follow. In the split second before the avalanche hit, Jack had a single clear thought. The north side of the cabin, his bedroom, would take the brunt of the impact. The bathroom was on the south side, interior walls between it and the coming onslaught. It was their only chance. Max was already moving, somehow understanding the urgency, even without comprehending the specific threat. The dog darted into the bathroom just as Jack reached the raccoon family's makeshift nest. The mother raccoon hissed in alarm as Jack scooped up the entire container, babies and all, and dove into the bathroom. He slammed the door shut behind them, just as the world exploded with sound and fury. The impact, when it came, felt like a freight train hitting the cabin. The entire structure shuddered and groaned, wood splintering and glass shattering. Jack braced himself against the bathtub, cradling the raccoon container with one arm while trying to shield Max with his body. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the beam of the flashlight Jack had grabbed on instinct. For what seemed like an eternity, the cabin creaked and settled around them, the pressure of countless tons of snow reshaping its structure. When the initial violence subsided, Jack cautiously lifted his head. The bathroom door had buckled inward but held. The walls surrounding them were intact, though a fine dust of plaster and insulation drifted down from new cracks in the ceiling. We're okay, Jack murmured, his voice unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. We're okay. Max whined softly, pressing against Jack's leg. The raccoon mother had curled protectively around her babies, watching Jack with wary eyes. By some miracle, all 6 tiny kits appeared unharmed, nestled against their mother's fur. Jack directed his flashlight at the door. It was warped in its frame, unlikely to open easily. The small bathroom window was their alternative escape route, but outside lay a landscape transformed by the avalanche, possibly unstable and certainly dangerous in the ongoing blizzard. We need to stay put for now, Jack told Max, trying to ignore the cold that was already seeping into the room as the cabin's heating system failed. Wait out the storm. Hours passed in tense silence. Jack had the foresight to grab a few supplies when he'd rushed for the bathroom: a blanket, his emergency pack with basic first aid supplies, a couple of protein bars, and a bottle of water. He shared the water with Max and offered some to the raccoon mother, who cautiously accepted it. As dawn approached, the howling wind finally began to subside. The temperature in the bathroom had dropped steadily throughout the night. Jack's breath fogged in the beam of his flashlight, and he'd pulled Max close, sharing body heat. The raccoon family remained in their container, the mother's body heat seemingly sufficient to keep her babies warm. Time to see what we're dealing with, Jack told Max as the first gray light filtered through the snow-crusted window. Using a hairbrush handle, Jack managed to pry the warped door open, just enough to squeeze through. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. The north side of the cabin had effectively ceased to exist. Where his bedroom had been, there was now a solid wall of packed snow. The kitchen was partially intact but filled with snow and debris. The living room, where the fireplace stood, was a jumble of broken furniture, shattered glass, and more snow. Cold dread settled in Jack's stomach. Even if they could dig their way out, the temperature had plummeted well below zero. The cabin was no longer habitable, and the nearest neighbor was miles away across terrain now rendered unrecognizable by the avalanche and storm. "We need to move," Jack decided, his military training taking over. "Find shelter before nightfall." The raccoon family would need to be carried. The babies were too young, and the mother still too injured on her to survive the journey on their own. Jack fashioned a makeshift sling from his torn jacket, creating a pouch where the mother and babies could ride against his chest, sheltered from the wind. Max would have to make his own way, but the German Shepherd was well equipped for snow with his thick coat and powerful legs. After gathering what supplies he could salvage from the ruins of the cabin, extra flashlight, matches, hunting knife, the satellite phone, now with a cracked screen but possibly still functional, and his medical kit, Jack prepared for their departure. The raccoon mother was surprisingly cooperative, allowing herself and her babies to be settled into the sling. Perhaps she sensed that Jack represented their best chance for survival. They exited through what remained of the kitchen door, emerging into a world rendered alien by the storm. Snow had drifted against the south side of the cabin, creating a sloping ramp that allowed them to climb up and over the worst of the avalanche debris. The wind had died down, but the temperature was brutally cold, and the sky threatened more snow to come. Jack oriented himself, using the position of the hidden sun. Their best hope was to head southeast toward the main road, about 2 miles through the forest. In normal conditions, it would be an easy hike. In these conditions, with deep snow and potential avalanche danger, it would be a grueling journey. "Let's go, Max," Jack said, his voice nearly swallowed by the vast white emptiness around them. They made steady progress for the first hour, Max forging ahead to create a path through the deeper drifts. Jack focused on maintaining his footing and protecting the precious cargo against his chest. The raccoon babies remained quiet, perhaps lulled by the motion or simply conserving energy. As they entered the denser part of the forest, Jack allowed himself a moment of optimism. The trees would provide some shelter from the wind and had likely prevented the snow from drifting as deeply here. They might reach the road before nightfall after all. That hope died as they crested a small rise, and Jack saw what lay ahead. A section of forest where the avalanche had continued its destructive path, knocking down trees like matchsticks and creating a chaotic jumble of splintered trunks, branches, and deep snow. To bypass it would add hours to their journey, taking them dangerously close to nightfall. "We have to go through," Jack decided grimly. The downed trees created a treacherous obstacle course. Jack climbed over trunks, squeezed between branches, and navigated patches of unstable snow. Max stayed close, occasionally whining with concern when Jack stumbled. The raccoon mother remained remarkably calm, her small paws occasionally gripping the edge of the sling as they negotiated particularly difficult passages. They were halfway through the devastated area when Jack heard it, a faint cracking sound from somewhere ahead, followed by Max's sudden alert posture. The dog froze, ears forward, muscles tense. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, instinctively reaching for the reassuring weight of his hunting knife. The cracking came again, louder this time, and Jack realized with sickening clarity what was happening. One of the damaged trees, its trunk partially split by the avalanche, was giving way under the weight of snow and ice. Max understood before Jack did, lunging forward with a bark of warning just as the massive spruce began its deadly descent. Time seemed to slow as Jack watched the tree falling directly toward them. His combat training took over, and he twisted to protect the raccoon sling, dropping to his knees to make himself a smaller target. But Max, loyal, brave, selfless Max, made a different choice. The German Shepherd launched himself at Jack, his powerful body hitting with enough force to shove his human clear of the tree's main trunk. Jack sprawled face first into the snow. The raccoon family clutched protectively against his chest as the tree crashed down with a thunderous impact. When Jack struggled to his knees, spitting snow and searching frantically, his blood turned to ice. Max lay pinned beneath a large branch, unnaturally still against the white background. Only his head and front shoulders were visible, the rest of his body trapped beneath the massive weight. "Max!" Jack scrambled toward his dog, heedless of the unstable snow or the possibility of other falling trees. "Oh God, Max, no!" The dog's eyes flickered open at Jack's voice, and his tail thumped weakly against the snow, attempting to wag despite his situation. Jack fell to his knees beside Max, hands hovering uselessly over the branch that pinned his beloved companion. It was too heavy to lift alone, too thick to break. "Hang on, buddy," Jack said, voice breaking. "Just hang on, I'll get you out." But Max's breathing was labored, each exhale creating a small cloud in the frigid air. His intelligent eyes held Jack's gaze steadily, something like acceptance in their depths. He made a soft whining sound, not of pain but of reassurance, and Jack felt his heart shattering. "Don't you dare," he whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare give up, not after everything we've been through." The raccoon mother chittered softly from the sling, her small face peering out at the scene. Max's eyes shifted to her momentarily, then back to Jack. The message couldn't have been clearer if the dog had spoken. Take care of them. Get them to safety. As darkness began to fall around them, Jack faced the most impossible choice of his life. Jack refused to accept the choice before him. The rational part of his mind, the hardened soldier who had made life-or-death decisions in combat, knew that Max was gravely injured, possibly dying, and that nightfall in these temperatures would be fatal for the raccoon babies. The logical course would be to continue toward help, to save those who could be saved. But Jack Peterson had not survived war only to abandon his closest companion in his hour of need. "I'm not leaving you," he told Max firmly, setting the raccoon sling carefully in a sheltered spot between two fallen logs. "We're all getting out of here, or none of us are." For the next hour, as the last light faded from the sky, Jack worked with desperate intensity. He fashioned a crude lever system using broken branches, trying to create enough lift to free Max without causing further injury. Each attempt ended in failure, the massive tree limb barely moving despite Jack's straining muscles. When darkness made further efforts impossible, Jack built a small shelter around Max using fallen branches and his own coat. He cleared snow from beneath the dog to prevent the cold from leaching away vital body heat, then settled himself against Max's exposed front half, sharing warmth while keeping one arm around the raccoon sling. "Remember that night outside Kandahar?" Jack murmured to Max, needing to fill the silence as stars appeared in the clearing sky above. "The night our unit got separated from the convoy, you and me, huddled in that bombed-out building, waiting for extraction. Everyone said we wouldn't make it, but we proved them wrong." He stroked Max's head, feeling the dog's shallow breathing. "We're going to prove them wrong again, buddy." The night seemed endless, a battle against cold and despair. Jack dozed fitfully, startling awake at every sound from the forest. Max grew weaker, his breathing more labored, but stubbornly clung to life. The raccoon mother remained silent and watchful, as if understanding the gravity of their situation. Dawn brought renewed determination and an unexpected sound, the distant whump-whump of helicopter blades. Jack scrambled to his feet, disbelieving, then remembered the satellite phone. In his final moments of consciousness the night before, he'd managed to send out an SOS with their GPS coordinates. Someone had received it. The search and rescue helicopter appeared above the tree line, circling once before hovering near a clearing about 100 yards away. Jack waved frantically, then watched as a figure was lowered on a cable. Within minutes, the rescuer, a stocky man in a bright orange jumpsuit, was making his way through the fallen trees toward them. "Jack Peterson?" the man called. "I'm Steve Martinez with Search and Rescue. Got your distress signal. Quite a storm you folks had up here." "My dog," Jack said by way of greeting, gesturing to Max. "He's trapped, been pinned all night." Martinez assessed the situation quickly, his expression grim but professional. "We need to stabilize him before moving that branch." I've got equipment in my pack, and my partner can bring the rest when I signal." Within 30 minutes, a second rescuer had joined them, bringing specialized equipment, hydraulic lifts, medical supplies, and a canine stretcher. Working together, they carefully raised the branch pinning Max and secured it, allowing Jack to gently pull his dog free. The damage was severe. Max's hindquarters were crushed, his breathing shallow and rapid with shock and pain. The rescue medic administered emergency treatment, stabilizing the dog for transport while Jack hovered anxiously nearby, the raccoon family still secured against his chest. "We can fit all of you in the chopper," Martinez said, eyeing the raccoon sling with raised eyebrows but asking no questions. "But your dog needs immediate veterinary attention. There's a clinic in Whitefish that handles emergency cases." The flight to Whitefish passed in a blur of anxiety. Max, strapped to the stretcher and heavily sedated, remained unnervingly still. The raccoon mother and her babies huddled quietly in their sling, apparently subdued by the vibration and noise of the helicopter. Jack held the dog's head in his lap, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even as he spoke them. At the veterinary clinic, a team was waiting. Max was rushed inside while Jack, still carrying the raccoon family, was directed to a waiting area. Only then did he realize how he must appear, filthy, exhausted, half-frozen, and cradling a family of wild animals against his chest. The clinic's director, Dr. Reynolds, approached with a mixture of concern and bewilderment. "Mr. Peterson, I understand your dog is being treated, but are those raccoons?" Jack explained the situation as concisely as he could. The injured mother, Max's protection of the family, the avalanche, and their desperate escape attempt. Dr. Reynolds listened with increasing interest, occasionally glancing at the raccoon mother, who watched the proceedings with alert wariness. "The mother needs medical attention too," Jack concluded, "and the babies need proper care. I couldn't leave them behind." "No, of course not," Dr. Reynolds agreed, surprising Jack with her understanding. "Let me examine them while my team works on your dog." The next few hours passed in anxious waiting. Jack paced the clinic's small lounge, his mind replaying the events that had led to this moment. Everything had changed so quickly, from his solitary existence with Max to becoming responsible for a family of wild creatures, from the security of his cabin to being rendered homeless by nature's fury. Finally, Dr. Reynolds appeared, her expression carefully neutral. "Your dog is out of surgery, Mr. Peterson. We've stabilized him, but the injuries are severe. The next 24 hours will be critical." Jack nodded, throat too tight for words. "As for your raccoon family," she continued, "the mother's recovering well from the infection. The wound was treated properly. Your work, I assume?" "Former veterinarian," Jack managed. "I thought as much. The babies are dehydrated, but otherwise healthy. They're being fed now." She hesitated, then added, "There is something else you should know. While we were treating the mother, we found evidence of an older injury, a gunshot wound that healed poorly. She's been shot before, Mr. Peterson, deliberately." Jack's exhaustion cleared instantly. "Shot? You're certain?" "Without question. Small caliber, probably a .22. Someone tried to kill her, and recently, within the last few months. It wasn't a hunting accident. The angle suggests someone shot her at close range." The pieces suddenly aligned in Jack's mind. The mother raccoon's unusual trust of Max, the illegal trap, Tom's vehement reaction to Jack's protection of the raccoons. "It was Tom," he said slowly. "Tom Thompson shot her, and when that didn't work, he set traps." "You should know," Dr. Reynolds added, "that the game warden is here. He wants to speak with you about the trap you mentioned in your SOS. Apparently, they've been investigating a poaching ring operating in your area." The game warden, a stern-faced woman named Ranger Wilson, interviewed Jack in a small office at the clinic. Her questions were direct and professional, focusing on the specific design of the trap, its location, and Jack's interactions with Tom Thompson. "We've suspected Thompson for months," Wilson told him, making notes as they spoke. "But we lacked sufficient evidence to obtain a search warrant for his property. Your raccoon and that trap could change that." "Max found her," Jack said, the realization dawning even as he spoke. "That day in October when he disappeared during our walk. He must have found her after she'd been shot, maybe tracked her to wherever she was hiding. Then when she got caught in the trap later, he recognized her scent and helped her again." Dogs have been known to form unusual bonds, Wilson agreed. Especially intelligent ones like German Shepherds. If she was injured both times, his protective instincts might have overridden his training. Will this be enough to stop Thompson and whoever he's working with? Jack asked. Combined with what we already have, yes. We'll be executing search warrants on Thompson's property and the old Peterson place by this afternoon. Wilson closed her notebook. Your dog did more than save a raccoon family, Mr. Peterson. He may have helped us break open a major poaching operation. As Ranger Wilson left, Jack's phone buzzed with a local news alert. Someone, likely one of the men who had come to his cabin with Tom, had spoken to the press. The headline read, "Local veteran risks life to save wildlife." The story described, with considerable dramatization, how Jack had protected an injured raccoon family and nearly lost his life in an avalanche. Social media was already ablaze with comments, divided between those praising Jack's compassion and those questioning his judgment. By evening, the story had evolved. A local reporter had connected Jack's raccoon rescue with the police activity at Tom Thompson's property, speculating about a potential poaching ring. Community opinion was shifting rapidly as people realized the wildlife Jack had protected might be victims of illegal hunting activities. Sarah Thompson arrived at the clinic shortly after nightfall, her face drawn with worry. "I just heard," she said, clasping Jack's hand, "about Max and the avalanche, and—" She lowered her voice. "They've arrested Tom. Found all kinds of evidence at our place and at old Jim's. Traps, animal parts, records of sales. He's been doing it for years, Jack." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Jack said, meaning it. Whatever Tom had done, Sarah had been kind to him, had warned him at her own risk. "Don't be," she replied firmly. "I've suspected for a long time, just didn't want to believe it. Tom's made his choices." She squeezed his hand before releasing it. "The community's talking about what you did, saving those raccoons, protecting them from Tom's group. People are divided, but more support you than not, especially now that the truth about the poaching is coming out." As Sarah left, Jack returned to Max's side in the recovery area. The dog lay unnaturally still, connected to monitors and IVs, but his eyes opened at Jack's approach. Despite everything, his tail thumped weakly against the blanket. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Jack murmured, gently stroking Max's head. "About Tom, about the raccoon mother. You were trying to protect them from the real threat." Max's eyes held his steadily, seeming to confirm Jack's words. "Rest now, buddy. You did good. You did real good." Spring came to Montana with its usual tentative warmth, melting snow in fitful stages and coaxing new life from the thawing ground. On the south-facing slope of Jack Peterson's property, the land that had been scoured by the December avalanche now sprouted tender green shoots between fallen trees and lingering patches of dirty snow. Nature was reclaiming what had been disrupted, beginning the long process of healing and renewal. Jack stood on the porch of his newly rebuilt cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching as Max navigated the gentle incline with deliberate care. The German Shepherd's movements were slower now, his hindquarters supported by a wheeled harness that Dr. Reynolds had custom designed for him. The veterinarian had been blunt in her assessment after that terrible night. Max would never regain full use of his back legs. The crush injuries had been too severe, the damage to his spine irreparable. But with proper support and physical therapy, she had promised, Max could still have a good quality of life. She had been right. Despite his limitations, Max approached each day with the same steadfast determination he'd always shown. He'd adapted to the wheeled support with remarkable patience, learning to maneuver over uneven ground and negotiate the cabin's ramp with dignity intact. If he sometimes whined in frustration when unable to navigate a particularly challenging obstacle, he never surrendered to self-pity. "Coming, buddy?" Jack called, setting his coffee aside. Max turned at the sound, tail wagging as he made his way back toward the cabin. As always, Jack felt the familiar mixture of pride and heartache as he watched his dog's measured progress. The guilt still surfaced sometimes. If he had abandoned the raccoon family, could he have freed Max sooner? Would the damage have been less severe? Dr. Reynolds had assured him that Max's injuries had been catastrophic from the moment of impact, that nothing short of immediate surgical intervention could have changed the outcome. Still, the what-ifs haunted Jack's quieter moments. The distinctive chittering sound from the edge of the clearing drew both their attentions. A familiar form emerged from the underbrush. The raccoon mother, now fully recovered and restored to her wild vitality. Behind her, significantly grown but still recognizable, came her 6 offspring, nearly adults themselves now, but still following their mother's lead. "Look who's back," Jack remarked to Max, whose tail was now wagging furiously. The visit wasn't unexpected. The raccoon family had been making regular appearances since Jack and Max had returned to the property 2 months ago, after the new cabin was habitable. The mother seemed to recognize them, approaching with cautious familiarity, rather than the wariness wild raccoons typically showed humans. Jack had constructed a proper wildlife shelter at the edge of his property, a safe distance from the cabin, but close enough to monitor. Built with the same care he'd once devoted to Max's kennel, the structure offered protection for injured or vulnerable animals while they recovered enough to return to the wild. The raccoon family had been its first residents, staying until early spring, when the mother had led her youngsters back to the forest, ready to teach them the ways of their kind. Their periodic returns felt like status reports, the mother's way of acknowledging the strange alliance that had formed between species. Jack never attempted to touch them or encourage dependency, respecting their wildness. But he welcomed their visits, seeing in them the living proof of Max's compassion and courage. Inside the cabin, the phone rang. Jack left Max enjoying the raccoon family's company and went to answer it. Sarah Thompson's voice came through, as warm and practical as ever. "Just checking to see if you and Max are still coming to the town meeting tonight," she said without preamble. "The council's voting on the wildlife corridor proposal, and we need all the support we can get." "Wouldn't miss it," Jack assured her. "How's the petition coming along? Over 500 signatures now. People are really engaging with this issue, Jack. I think what happened with you and Max and those raccoons opened a lot of eyes." In the months since the avalanche, the story of Max's protection of the raccoon family had spread, first locally, then regionally, finally garnering national attention when it coincided with the breaking news of the poaching ring's exposure. Tom Thompson and his associates were awaiting trial, facing multiple federal charges for wildlife trafficking. The evidence recovered from their operation had been damning. Detailed records of illegal traps, animal parts sold to overseas buyers, and a network that extended throughout 3 states. The publicity had thrust Jack and Max into an uncomfortable spotlight, but it had also catalyzed an unexpected community response. Sarah Thompson, determined to make amends for her ex-husband's crimes, had spearheaded a campaign to create a protected wildlife corridor through the area, connecting existing conservation lands and providing safe passage for the region's diverse wildlife. Jack had found himself reluctantly drawn into these efforts, his background as a veterinarian lending credibility to the cause. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he was using his medical knowledge again, working with local conservation groups to develop protocols for treating and rehabilitating injured wildlife found on private property. "I'll pick you up at 6, Sarah was saying. "And Jack? Bring those photos of the new rehab facility. Seeing what you've built really helps people understand what we're trying to do on a larger scale." After hanging up, Jack returned to the porch. The raccoon family had vanished back into the forest, but Max remained at the clearing's edge, gazing after them with what Jack could only describe as satisfaction. The dog had accepted his new limitations with the same stoic grace he'd shown throughout his life, finding purpose in the protection and care of the creatures that now regularly appeared at the wildlife shelter. As if sensing Jack's thoughts, Max turned and made his way back to the cabin, his wheeled support crunching over the gravel path. When he reached the ramp, Jack knelt to help adjust the harness straps that sometimes chafed after extended outdoor time. "You changed everything, you know that?" Jack told the dog softly, scratching behind his ears. "For those raccoons, for this community, for me." It was true. The events of that December night had transformed Jack's isolated existence in ways he could never have anticipated. His rebuilt cabin now included an attached clinic space where he provided free veterinary care to wildlife and the pets of local residents who couldn't afford the services in town. The wildlife shelter had expanded from a single structure to a small compound with specialized areas for different species and rehabilitation needs. Most significantly, Jack himself had changed. The walls he'd built around himself after Afghanistan had crumbled, not all at once but gradually, breach by breach, as he'd been drawn back into the community. First through the raccoon rescue, then through Sarah's advocacy efforts, and finally through the revival of his veterinary practice. The nightmares hadn't disappeared completely, but they came less frequently now, diluted by days filled with purpose and connection. That evening, as Jack and Max entered the town hall for the council meeting, the response was immediate and warming. People who had once viewed Jack as the strange recluse veteran now greeted him with genuine respect. Children approached to pet Max, delighted by his wheeled support, which Jack had painted bright blue with reflective stars at the suggestion of Dr. Reynolds' 9-year-old daughter. The meeting itself was a formality. The wildlife corridor proposal passed unanimously, bolstered by the petition signatures and the powerful narrative of Max's protection of the raccoon family. As various community members stood to speak in favor of the initiative, Jack was struck by how deeply the story had resonated, not as a feel-good animal tale, but as a testament to the possibility of compassion across boundaries, whether between species or between people with different values and perspectives. Later, as Jack drove home with Max dozing in the specially adapted back seat, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the isolation of their early days in Montana to their current role at the center of a community conservation effort. From Jack's abandonment of his healing vocation to his renewed commitment to using his skills for the benefit of all creatures. The new cabin came into view, its windows glowing warmly in the dusk. Unlike the original structure built for solitude and self-sufficiency, this one had been designed with community in mind. The clinic area accessible from a separate entrance, the wildlife shelter visible from the main house, the porch expanded to accommodate visitors who now regularly sought Jack's counsel on wildlife matters. As they approached, Jack spotted movement at the edge of the property, the now familiar silhouette of the raccoon mother, watching their return. In the fading light, she seemed to nod once before disappearing back into the forest, a wild creature acknowledging the unusual bond that had formed through crisis and compassion. "Home, Max," Jack said softly as he parked and came around to help his dog from the vehicle. "We're home." And they were. Not to the fortress of solitude Jack had once sought, but to a sanctuary built on the foundation of Max's simple, profound act of compassion. A place of healing, for wildlife, for the community, and most unexpectedly, for Jack himself. In the quiet corners of our lives, when the world seems cold and indifferent, sometimes it takes the pure heart of those we protect to teach us how to truly live again. Max's story reminds us that compassion knows no boundaries, not between species, not between strangers, and certainly not between those wounded by life's harshest battles. For those of us who have weathered our own storms and built walls to keep the world at bay, perhaps there's a lesson here. Healing rarely comes from isolation. It arrives unexpectedly, often through acts of selfless love that demand we look beyond our own pain. Like Jack, many of us have carried invisible wounds, seeking solitude when what we truly needed was purpose. But it's never too late to rediscover our capacity to care, to protect, and to build something meaningful from the wreckage of our difficult pasts. The truest measure of a life well lived isn't found in the battles we've survived, but in the compassion we've shown when it would have been easier to turn away. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.